A dark shadow passed over the ridge. The old man pulled the trigger.
This may have been the easiest money ever made, buddy.
Smugly, he thought he'd hit the big game. He went up the hill to check it out. But when they walked in, they found that it wasn't the prey that had fallen. It was an old man covered in blood. John rushed up to check it out. The old man was Charlie, one of the guides here. Charlie was still very much alive. John thought it would be a good idea to get Charlie to town as soon as possible. The old man handed John the keys to his car. He stayed behind to look after Charlie. But as John walked away and looked at all this, the old man hesitated. The old man was an accomplished local businessman. He loved to hunt. He's all geared up for a Bigfoot hunt. But he didn't have a license. But he was convinced that money could get him through. So he paid off the sheriff for a chance to hunt bighorn sheep, and hired John as a guide. Now the tables have turned, and the old man's company is in the middle of a deal. If there's bad publicity, the deal will be compromised. In order to protect himself, he had a wicked idea. He picked up John's shotgun, and fired another shot at Charlie on the ground. Then he skillfully removed the bolt and threw it away. John, who had heard the shot, rushed back and asked the old man what had happened. The old man told him he had no choice, and that there were now 2 different bullets in the body. Justice will decide whoever killed this man. It couldn't have been an accident, because accidents don't happen twice. If John takes the body back, John's taking half the risk. The old man's doing this to drive John into a corner. And then, he offered a starting salary of $300,000 for the job. John knows that the old man has a gun. It's up to him whether he agrees or not. He can only accept the old man's offer for the time being. And with that, they shook hands and made a deal. Then they went to the bottom of the hill. They buried Charlie's body. But John left one of Charlie's hands. He left one of Charlie's hands outside. Then John pretended to go to the front to get water. He found a satellite phone. When he was about to call the police, the old man suddenly raised his gun from behind and aimed it at him. The old man forced John to drop the phone. The old man was so angry that he stomped on the phone. But he didn't kill him right away. Faced with the betrayal of his own John, he thought of a new way to play the game. He made John take off his clothes. Old man with a shotgun, forcing the men to take off their clothes and shoes, with only a pair of underpants. He then instructed the men to hike in the desert, because by noon, it's gonna be 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the desert. And if John managed to die in the desert, Charlie's death could be blamed on John, and clear his name. What the old man didn't know was that guides working in the desert usually set up a supply depot. John followed the poles all the way. He wanted to find pole number 277, because that's where the directions to the supply depot are. The sun is burning. John's body has suffered extensive burns. To get out of the old man's sight, he jumped into a ravine. When John disappeared, the old man drove after him. Luckily, John found a tunnel. He quickly peeled back the rocks to get in. Then he kicked the stakes that were holding up the opening. By the time the old man got there, all that was left was a smoking hole. The old man stood guard at the entrance with his gun, but he didn't know there was more to it. John followed a passageway to a cellar. This was where the dead Charlie had built his supply depot. Outside, the old man sees that the hole is silent. He realized there must be another way out, so he drove to the back of the hill, and there he found the entrance to the cellar. John took the canteen from the table and drank from it. Then he put on Charlie's trousers and shoes. On the wall of the cellar, John found a map. The map showed the supply points in the desert. Then there were footsteps outside the cellar. John hid the map in his trousers and ducked into the passageway. The old man cautiously entered the house. He turned off the record player. He found the gunpowder hidden under the record player. He knew John was still in the house, so he lit 2 of them and threw them in the room. Then he took the rest and ran out. John, who was hiding in the passageway, hearing the sound of the gunpowder igniting, he climbed out and tried to put it out. But he couldn't extinguish the fuse. He had no choice but to run for the door. The old man was outside the door. He checked John's pockets. He told him to take off his shoes. Then he forced John to continue on foot. John came to a rocky area, where he found 2 old, worn-out couches. He ripped up the couches and pulled off some cloth and sponge, and wrapped them around the soles of his feet. which were already dry and bleeding. When John didn't come out, the old man kept urging him to come out. John used the sofas to climb out, and climbed out through a crack in the rock, and lost the old man's watchful eye. John pulls out a map and looks at it. According to the markings on it, he dug up a box hidden in the ground. Inside was a box of marbles and a slingshot. Small items, but a weapon in his hand. Then under a pile of photographs, he found a small, more detailed map. According to the markings on it, John dug a bucket of water under a pile of grass. To prevent the old man from finding him, he dragged the bucket behind a small hill. But as soon as he lifted the bucket to take a drink, the bucket was shot at. John had no choice but to keep going, while the old man lay in a chaise longue, while he sipped his martini. As he watched John dehydrate, I don't know how long it took. John couldn't stand the scorching sun above him, and collapsed in the desert. The old man was around him with a gun. When he saw that John wasn't moving, he thought he was dead. The old man turned and left, but then John's pupils flickered under the old man's successive shots. The man remained motionless, not even blinking, creating a natural death for John. The old man made him take off his clothes and shoes and hike through the desert. He wanted him to die of dehydration. After several attempts, he thought John was dead. The old man drove off satisfied, but when he made a phone call from his car, he found John on a hill not far away. Realizing he'd been tricked, furious, the old man couldn't think of anything else. He raised his shotgun and took aim at John. The distance was too great. The old man fired several shots, but failed to hit John, so he put the shotgun away and drove up the hill. As the old man's car approached, John could only climb as high as he could, because here, there was a spring that only he and his girlfriend knew about. But as he climbed in, the spring had long since dried up. John fell into the hole in despair, and now his last hope was gone, and the old man is still out there with his megaphone. John crumpled to the ground in despair. The two of them stayed like this until nightfall. Suddenly something in the distance drew John to his feet. It was the difference in temperature between day and night in the desert. The temperature difference between day and night in the desert had created a small puddle in a puddle. He crawled over to the puddle to get some pain. After regaining some strength, John crept out of the cave. While the old man went to put out the water, he quickly made his way to the car. He opened the door gently to look for the phone, but couldn't find it. He hurriedly grabbed some clothes. When the old man came back, he saw the door of Su Yuenjin's car, immediately realized that something was wrong. He slowed down and looked around. He knew John must be hiding behind the car, so he suddenly started the car. Then he quickly reversed the car. Luckily, the car's chassis was very high. John was able to get underneath the car and survive. Then he got up and ran behind a rock. The old man was furious that he'd been tricked twice. He lit a gunpowder charge and tried to blow John up. John ran for cover and ended up behind a small rock. The dynamite was gone. The old man set up his shotgun again and fired wildly at the rock where John was hiding. He was going to break the rock and kill John. Just as the old man was about to change bullets, John seized the opportunity to get up quickly, and with one precise shot, he knocked the old man out. John ended up putting the old man in jail and left town to live with his girlfriend. But what he didn't expect, that the old man would once again. He used his powers to escape. After that, John had nightmares that the old man would come to take revenge on him. But that night, the old man did come. Just as he raised his gun and was about to pull the trigger, his girlfriend suddenly shot the old man in the arm. She panicked and dropped the gun on the floor. In a moment of crisis, John quickly picked up the gun and shot the old man again. The old man hunts for money on Wall Street. In the desert, he hunts for life. When accidents happen, the rules of the game escalate to a hunt for human life. In his eyes, everything can be measured in terms of money. But in the face of life and death, all humans are fair game.